And there we go. I'm Ian Robert Jones, and this is Arts BC's Facebook Live, sponsored by the 2018 Arts BC Conference. This year's conference is taking place at the Nikkei Cultural Centre in Burnaby, BC. That takes place between May the 10th and 12th. This year's theme is engagement in a new arts era. And with me this week to talk a little bit about different type of engagement is Jeanne LeSage. Jeanne LeSage. And let's get it out of the way from the start, Jeanne. You are not related to Jeanne LeSage, the other Jeanne LeSage.
Well, maybe not, but no, probably not.
All right, that's the 19th Premier of Quebec, by the way. People might not know that. You know, responsible for the Quiet Revolution, in part. Anyway, welcome to the show, Jeanne.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Good. So I always start with this. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Where did you get your start, Jeanne?
Oh, I have the weirdest career trajectory, I think, ever. I started out as a stage manager in theater and did that for about 10 years across Canada, mostly in theater, small indie theater, but a lot of different places across the country. I've been doing this for about 27 years, and after working as a stage manager, I worked at TIFF, the Toronto International Film Festival, for 10 years, working in the theaters department, and then starting their first ever HR department back in the day. And then I had a period of working internationally. So I left Canada. I was an international arts management fellow at the Kennedy Center for Arts in Washington, D.C. I went on to work in international arts projects. I was managing producer of the Abu Dhabi Film Festival in the United Arab Emirates, and then went on to work as deputy CEO of the Royal Opera House in Muscat, Oman. Couple of other things here and there, and then I came back to Canada, was in Vancouver as executive director of the K-Meek Centre for Performing Arts in beautiful West Van, and loved living on the North Shore. And then since then worked on my MBA in management consulting, started a consultancy. I'm also a churl, which is a certified human resource leader. So I'm a certified human resource person. And I've been working in my consultancy, working on strategy, facilitation, but have really actually started to do a big focus on arts HR. So that's me.
Wow, so not very much experience.
You know, a little bit of this, a little bit of that.
Well, that's awesome. We're thrilled to bits that you're coming to the 2018 Arts BC conference to present to us. They've actually got you working like a dog there. So tell us a little bit about the sessions. What are you going to be doing?
Yeah, I've noticed that. I'm wondering if I'm supposed to be also, washing some dishes too. So I'll do that. It's good.
Well, that's Patricia.
Yeah. So I had to write this down. I had to put it on one of my color-coded cue cards. I'm doing 3 different sessions, and I'm really excited about it. And one of them is I think an unofficial one, but on Thursday morning at 11 a.m. they're doing these huddle sessions, and I was asked to do one of the huddle sessions to focus on arts HR, and we're calling it HR 911. So it'll be any questions that anybody has about dealing with urgent HR situations, because we all know when these things happen, you need help fast. And then the formal sessions I'm doing 2 of them on Friday. So at 1:15, I'm doing one of the breakout sessions that's on Arts HR 101, with also a focus on workplace harassment. And then at 2:15, I'm doing a session on leadership in succession.
Wow, so that's a lot, but that's great because we really need that conversation right now. It's you have your own company called LeSage Arts Management. You also teach at Humber College and at Ryerson. Tell us a little bit, first of all, about LeSage Arts Management. What do you guys do? What can you help people out with?
The we, which is the modest we, which is me. Since doing a ton of frontline work as executive director, general manager, managing producer, and then after working on my master's and doing my MBA, I've been really working on with my clients in my consultancy on things that are really helping improve the efficiency and the operations of their organization. So I have definitely worked on strategic planning and overall strategy. But what's been interesting is in the last 6, 7, 8 months, I've actually started to really zero in my practice on HR. And, HR is something that I fell into at the Toronto International Film Festival because it was one of these, it was a growing organization in a time of dynamic change, and they recognized that they really needed formal HR processes. So they put me, the stage manager, out to school to learn HR, and we built the HR department from the ground up from the point of view of what was good for the organization. So looking at, as I was building my consultancy, I was seeing that HR is a really underdeveloped piece in our sector. Everybody's really good at wearing a lot of hats. General managers, executive directors, artistic directors, you all end up having about 4, 5, 6 different hats of what you do. And not a lot of companies have or can afford dedicated HR staff. So I was starting to find that when people knew that I had a background, I had the certification in HR, experience as frontline HR, as well as being a general manager, executive director, there was starting to be a real need for helping people out on an HR basis.
Yeah, and you told me actually on the phone that even the word HR almost needs to be rebranded because it just means so much more now than finding people work and getting people's social insurance numbers, right?
Yeah, and all due respect to folks that do all that great work doing the payroll and sort of doing what, in earlier eras, it would have been called personnel, and it might have been more focused on, all the kind of, whether it's the paperwork and the real compliance pieces and payroll and benefits and things like that. And over the years, outside of the art sector, HR has grown to be a real strategic arm of the organization. But we haven't necessarily seen that growth in the importance of that in the art sector, I would argue.
Yeah, that might be true. I'm not obviously an expert in that area as you are, but I think that it's interesting because, of course, a lot of organizations don't have HR departments, period. So they're probably going, what does this even mean? But
and that's fair dues. There's small organizations with small staff, so you may not need to have a solo HR person, but you still need to really kind of take care of the function in a strategic way.
Yeah. Let's talk about one of the other things that you're talking about at the conference. Actually, I'm going to put it up on the screen right now. You've got a session on Friday, May 11th, 1:15 to 2:15, where you're talking about workplace harassment. And of course, it's a very topical idea. We know all about the Harvey Weinsteins and the Kevin Spaceys, and there's a lot of discussion about workplace harassment. I would like you to break it down a little bit for us right from the start. What is workplace harassment?
Oh, yeah, for sure. And the caveat first that this will often be different province by province according to the jurisdiction of all the applicable compliance. And so I obviously have more experience in Ontario, but will be bringing forward what happens in BC. But to talk very generally, and of course, when I'm talking about workplace harassment and sexual harassment, it very much is in that organizational realm. And so we're hearing about a lot of different cases, which might be organizational, it might be in personal cases, it might be in different realms, but really what we're talking about is that organizational realm. And it can have different definitions in different jurisdictions, but it's generally, looking at unwelcome conduct, whether it's physical, verbal, that should be known or ought to be well known that it's unwelcome. And under that can also be things like bullying, but it also can be things like sexual harassment. And when you get into sexual harassment, in addition to that unwelcome conduct, comments, behavior, can also be that power dynamic. So if there's somebody that has power over somebody from that organizational point of view, if there's a request and a power dynamic for things that are unwanted, then that comes into play as well. So, and it's, I don't like to give really quick definitions because it's a very complex topic, but the reason that I have been bringing this up is I think it's really, really smart for organizations to understand their obligations of what they should be doing in terms of setting some systems and programs in place. And also just understanding how we as a sector can come together to work on this and try to, it's been really, really tough times, but I think it's also exciting because maybe we may be able to exact some change and make some really great improvements. Yeah,
I think that's true. This is the beginning of something for sure. Let me ask you, just to go back to something you just mentioned then, do most arts and cultural organizations have clear policies that their employees know, and that they know what rules they should be following?
I think it's really mixed. I think there's some people doing really, really great work in this regard. And I think just because this is now very much on the radar, again, with the Me Too and Time's Up, boards of directors, management, and funders are now looking to see, do we have things in place? And it gets really tough because, again, just like we said, small arts organizations can't even afford HR folks. So how can we actually really look at putting these things into place? And I don't want to kind of just come and sort of scare everybody and go, well, you have to be doing this and you need to be compliant because otherwise it's against the law, la, 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 la. I do think we need to be really clear about our obligations, because even if we're a small organization, even if it's not a lot of paid staff, might be even volunteer-led, we are employers and we have obligations as employers. I think we can really find a good balance of finding out what we're legally required to do and also go beyond that and find the ways to kind of put that in place and, really kind of rise above and look at the best ways to implement that.
And so will that be something you're talking to, or is that a subject you'll be talking to at the conference? You're going to help arts organizations
Absolutely.
think about what they can do?
Absolutely. And I think, and it's not helpful to come down with like, well, get your 20-person HR department to go and come up with a corporate, that doesn't help anybody. And the best thing is to really kind of find, there's some really great tools out there already. And in fact, in doing the research of transferring over from different provinces, BC's got some pretty great stuff online. And I want to really make sure that people can walk away with tools, not just kind of being, again, alarmed by what they should be doing and are not doing, but really like, so now what can I do? What can I do? And I think it's really, if I may, like, I would like us to be clear about why we think this is such a hard thing to address. And I think in our sector, it's not like the rules are new as of the last year. It's just that there's been a lot of things that have come forward and come to light that have sort of shown that maybe we just haven't been doing our best to kind of set up these programs and make sure things are being done fairly and equitably. And, I find it can be also very complicated in our sector because there's a lot of blurry lines. The work that we do in terms of being in the rehearsal hall and in venues and in theaters, and we've got artists and we've got employees, independent contractors, boards of directors, volunteers, people on full-time contract, people on short-term contract, people auditioning for work. It can be a very complex environment. And at the same time, we're so resource scarce that we're very low on staff to be able to work on these things. But it's still really important that we address this. And I think it's all,
how do you address that? Sorry.
How do you address?
Well, there's two kinds of thoughts there. You talked to me again about this. Like, for starters, there's small arts organizations who have people who are volunteers, they're contract workers, people who are putting massive amounts of time in. By the way, I want to say shout out to everybody who is a volunteer, because it's the end of National Volunteer Week, and we want to celebrate all the volunteers who work in the arts and cultural industries. We appreciate all your efforts, particularly the ones associated with Arts BC, like the president of our board of directors. But yeah, anyway, the point is that there's this very, it's happening on a very micro scale sometimes. And I think those people are really wondering what they can do. And so we want hard things from you, Jeanne. What can they do?
Well, I'm not going to give it all away. You got to come to the session. I think what's great is that we as a sector are really collaborative, and I feel like we're really open to sharing. And, and sometimes too, people might even, I'm not going to go to that session because I know we're not doing it, and I don't want to put up my hand and say we're not doing it because we really should be. But so I think we need to kind of give ourselves a break, take a big breath and go, okay, let's do it. Now let's just sit down and let's just do it. And let's find ways to do it together. And things that I've suggested to people is, right now we're actually seeing a lot of great leadership from unions, associations, and guilds. And because, so for example, the Not in Our Space initiative that's between PACT, the Professional Association of Canadian Theatre, and Canadian Actors Equity, in an aim to kind of raise awareness and to give tools. Actors doing something similar. You see again the guilds, because they're looking at protecting their members, and especially members that are very much in that gig economy where they're on contract, off contract, and it's really hard to kind of get them into that organizational scheme. I think also the ASOs kind of looking to see if you can share resources. So say there's 5 organizations of a similar size, maybe you get together to try to come up with some templates. And by the way, there's a lot of tools and templates out there. My one caveat is that you always need to make sure that you are doing what is most appropriate for your organization. And while I'm a big fan of finding templates that are, especially in your own jurisdiction, so for example, BC folks should look at BC ones, Alberta ones should look at Alberta ones, and then really look at it and go, okay, does this cover what our needs are because of the way that we're structured and, you know, what the shape of our organization is? Did I answer your question? I feel like maybe I'm missing a part of your something.
No, it's totally, listen, I think that's really a great idea. The first, like the idea of banding together and talking as groups of people about problems and how to solve, that's a really great idea. It's something I hadn't thought about, and that's why you're the expert.
Well, and the other thing is do things like, you know, if you really think that there's a gap, you know, we often look to our boards of directors. Sometimes in small organizations, your boards of directors bring expertise that is really required that you wouldn't be able to afford. So for example, you know, I love having accountants on our boards for treasurers. We love having some lawyers to help out. And so having folks that are schooled in governance and policy and HR can be a really great way to kind of supplement that expertise in your organization.
What do you think about sort of punitive things? Like I read an article recently that the Heritage Minister, Melanie Joly, she said that perhaps people's funding should be cut if they don't get on board with different types of initiatives that protect the employees in the workplace. What do you think about punitive things like that?
Well, you're putting
I want you to.
God, yes. I'm going to not answer your question for a second, but I'm going to talk. So I think the point first to take here is that funders are taking action. So funders are, and we've seen this, the Canada Council has said as much as well. So funders are, you know, they are taking action if they perceive these things not to be happening. I will not comment on that question. Very good question, by the way. But I think also, so how are we going to help people do this? How are we going to help people get all of their policies and programs up to speed and in a meaningful way? What I worry about though is I'm going to copy and paste that template from WorkSafe BC, put it up on the website, sign it, and we're done. I don't want to see that happening. And, you know, one might worry if something is legislated that some kind of copy paste repeat is happening. And I would like to see in my own HR Pollyanna way that we are really approaching this in a meaningful way, meaning the process of getting buy-in and trust in your organization to set those policies, to me, is as important as the documents themselves. Is the board of director involved? Do they buy in? Has management been involved? Have artists been involved? Maybe if you've got artists, even if they're not on contract with you all the time, but they've got experience. So even if you have those policies in place, do people trust them and buy into them, which means they will enact them. They will come forward if there's a problem because they trust in the mechanisms.
So do you find that there's resistance to this out there? Because it's hard to believe that there would be.
I think the resistance comes from, again, it's tough. There's a lack of resource and a lack of staff. So this is yet another thing to become an expert at. I feel like when you're an executive director or an artistic director or general manager of a small organization, you need to be expert at about 25 things. And this is yet another thing that you need to do and to learn. And these are tough conversations. And it's interesting, you know, there's some things that are very, very tangible and finite where, okay, so yes, that happened. So for example, outside of the realm of harassment, outside of the realm of sexual harassment or sexual discrimination, there's policies, and this isn't with an Ontario lens, where you also need to have a workplace violence policy. And in some ways, what is workplace violence, what is not workplace violence? It's pretty like the violence happened or it didn't happen. But when it comes to harassment, when it comes to respectful workplaces, first of all, it's a lot of, it could be seen as subjective, because it is this something that should be known to be unwelcome? I think it brings up, because of that artistic lens, and sort of, you and I had chatted the other day about why is it so difficult in this sector? I think there's also a lot of blurry lines when it comes to, well, when performers are on stage and they're being directed or choreographed or anything, that there's it's different. There's different rules that are attached when it's artistic. And also that kind of, well, what happens in the rehearsal hall. And P.S., by the way, it's not just in the rehearsal hall. I mean, this sort of happens in the office. It happens because we have events. We have so many different places that are the workplace. So looking at how you kind of unpack this is really challenging. Plus, I think, bottom line, when we're dealing with conflict in general, I think it's a really tough conversation. And I think there's a lot of really interesting people doing great work about saying, maybe you also sort of view this as conflict between people in a workplace context, and how do we kind of do this fairly, unpack it?
Well, I thought one of the things you suggested to me in that conversation that we had the other day was sponsoring conversations, general conversations about the nature of change. And I thought that was a really good way of addressing things, because for a lot of people, this is about understanding cultural norms and practices differently, and that's a process.
Yeah, I think it is interesting too, because I think it's possible too, if we, organizations, maybe if they've gone through some challenges or even haven't gone through challenges, what is that new normal of how we communicate to each other respectfully and with dignity, and how do we now interact with each other? And I think any kind of change is difficult. I think we know that just generally and anecdotally with anything, and especially a change like this, it's really kind of understanding, what do we need to do to really kind of make this change happen? What's that going to take?
Yeah, well, I think one of the things it's going to take, well, you told me this the other day. I feel like I'm repeating what you're saying to me.
Please, go for it. Clearly, I should have written that down, whatever I said to you. Yes.
No, but it's very true. One of the things that needs to change, I think, is our concept of what power looks like, for example, and how power threads itself through our cultures and our communities, but also our arts and cultural organizations, because it's really changing. I really notice in my own workspace that there's a much more distributed network of, well, let's just say the power isn't distributed yet, but people are thinking about it that way, and it's moving that way in some sectors. But you know what I mean? Changing the idea about when we think about power, that's what you told me.
Yeah,
you did.
I think, okay, excellent. Yeah, and I think, but I think also that transparency that goes along with that of what, what is the power dynamic and how are decisions being made? Because I think why things are so pervasive, and this isn't just our sector, but any kind of sector that has what I would say sort of subjective evaluations. I mean, I'm sure this happens if you think about it, even in academia, anytime where there's a subjective evaluation where, if somebody auditions and something was just kind of funny and they proceeded to kind of call it out and say, this is unwelcome, and then they're not cast or not asked back, or et cetera, et cetera. It's very hard to prove that that power dynamic was abused, because it's like, well, the casting is so subjective. And I'm not, I also think that we need to have that realm for the, that artistic, what is that choice in that dialogue. But over time, changing that dynamic of that power is just going to be really, really tough to do, because it's, I think you and I joked about where I still remember as a stage manager, having to tussle with people smoking in rehearsal halls. And yeah. I'm not conflating or equating these at all, because the seriousness is very, very different. But it seemed unreal that change could happen. And now you cannot even imagine that even being a conversation. I hope. I hope that's still the case. But do you see what I mean? Just about like what that dynamic of change is.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah, no, remember anyway, yeah. Yeah,
you're right. I remember that outside. When I was living in Montreal and they banned cigarette smoking in bars, I said it'll never happen. It's incredible. Yeah. I mean, it's like a national sport in Montreal, and yet nowadays, of course, everybody spills out onto the street and smokes cigarettes. But you're right. The norm has been established, and people understand the norm, and they change. And so I agree. It's quite possible for that to happen. Just one thing. I was wondering how. Workplace harassment. I'm just wondering how BC does. We're Arts BC, and so we're in the province of British Columbia, and you're in Ontario. But I'm curious because I think you told me that the standards are different across the province, and I think you said that BC does quite well in some regards.
Oh, what I was talking about is the tools available according to the different jurisdictions. Yeah.
Well, I wanted to talk about that too, with resources. So
No, and I'm very curious to have this conversation with the attendees in the conference because, and piece by the way, like when we come, and I'm very excited to be asked by Arts BC to come and deliver, and I'm really looking forward to it. The dialogue is going to be very important, and in preparation for this, I've been reaching out to people in BC to kind of go, okay, so what's happening? Who are the leaders in this? What are the really great tools? And to kind of make sure that we have that lens of how's it going in that sector, because I'm really keen to listen as well. And because I think overall when we think about this happening in our sector in this country, if I can have another Pollyanna moment, I end up talking a lot with clients and organizations, and I deliver sessions for ASOs, for art service organizations, and we end up talking a lot about the compliance piece. And a lot about here's the law, here's the programs, and all that's great. And I'm really excited that people are open and listening, and board chairs are coming, and all that's fantastic. But what I want us to get to is like we should be more than compliant. Like I feel like we as a sector can strive to be way better. We, what are our values as a sector? What are our values about how we want to treat people? And let's not just have the bar be the minimum compliance, and let's make it actually be way, way higher. And again, making that kind of change, I think it will be long-term, but I'd like to think that, we can do this because we're so amazing at everything else as well. I think we can really, really be leaders in this, and I'd like to see that happen.
Well, I think that's fabulous. I just got a shiver. You're absolutely right. We can set the bar higher. That's a fantastic note to leave this on. There's one thing I want to ask you before we go, because we've run out of time, Jeanne, but it's I like everybody to leave me with a conversation starter. I call it a conversation starter, but it's also something I get to post on Facebook the next day.
Okay.
It's something if people could think about, something that will give them some context.
Can I reframe it around that last conversation that you and I just had? Because I think that's the conversation starter, if that's okay. I think how can we be leaders in this? How can we really dive into this and find a way for us to let's put it another way. How do we be the leaders in this in terms of this movement, in terms of really kind of saying this is what we value and here's how we're going to demonstrate that, all the while still making our amazing art? There does not need to be a compromise. I think this is this and. So how do we, in the midst of making our amazing, amazing art? That's all. Okay. We can do it.
I think that's a fantastic way to leave it, because you're absolutely right. Ask for more, and as Kathy Ramsey says, more than compliant. Yeah.
Yes. But you need to be compliant. I know. I need to do both. Yes, and. But thank you, Kathy. I totally agree.
Kathy Fraser, the great president of the Arts BC organization. And just again, big shout out to every volunteer. As volunteer week ends, we want to thank you from the bottom of our hearts. We appreciate your efforts so much. And Jeanne LeSage, we appreciate you. Can't wait to see you in Burnaby.
Great. Can't wait to see you. It's just a couple weeks.
Get ready for the mound of work.
Talk to you soon. Okay.
Take care. Thanks
again.
A lot.
Okay. Bye-bye.